last few days suggests that there is a learning process going on. But it's important that people like Joe be speaking out on this generally, not in a partisan way, but in a way that settles us all down and helps us understand that we're all part of the common humanity, and that talking about nuclear war is absolutely insane. Frankly, I might add, spending $1 trillion that we don't have to modernize our nuclear arsenal seems to me to be insane. I thought we were trying to get rid of these things. I can't say enough for Joe and what he's done, and what he continues to do. And while he's, I guess, retired from teaching, I hope and expect he's going to be a very strong and very firm and very wise voice for all of us as we work our way through this latest crisis. And believe me, it's solvable. There's any question about it. I think one of the things we can do, in addition to listening to Joe and some of you today about possible approaches to this, is to use whatever modest influence the Boston Global Forum has to start bringing some sense and rationality to this thing, and to do what, in point of fact, we were able to do back many years ago when we thought it pretty much resolved this, and then for a variety of reasons that I won't get into, the thing was blown up, and we find ourselves in a crisis mode once again. But on our behalf, Joe, on behalf of all of us, and frankly, on behalf of humanity, it's a real pleasure for me to be able to present this award to you and to recognize the work that you do, with the hope that you will continue to do this as long as you've got energy and breath in your body. I mean, it's just so important that your voice be out there and be trying to guide us as we work our way through these kinds of things. So, if you would pop up here and somebody can give me whatever it is that I'm supposed to present to you. There's one. Here we go. It's a special pleasure to honor Joseph Nye with the Distinguished Global Educator for Peace and Innovation Award to Global Citizenship Education Network. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Mike.
I think, Tom, you've got a little bit of an introduction to make at this point?
I do.
Yes? Okay.
Thank you.
Go away.
You get to come back, Joe. Why don't you look at that?
Just want to say a few words about our sponsor and the group that sponsors this lectureship. It's the Wasson Group, and we had 24 of their top young leaders here in June for a week, and as they listened to us talk about American politics and democratic values, and the CEO of the Wasson Group, which is the largest steel provider in all of Southeast Asia, reaches out to about 70 countries, is absolutely committed to changing that country, and thinks that he can do that in part by educating his own staff on the values of a more open society, and he himself is an exemplary individual. He started the company with $100. Is now worth several billions of dollars, and he was here in June and gave a talk at the conclusion to that week-long stay of his staff, in which he said that you can't help or can't control to whom you're born, but you can control what you become. And that's been his philanthropic mission in Vietnam. He spent tens of millions of dollars helping the disabled, the homeless, and orphans in Vietnam. He runs a national soccer tournament for them. He has special events on holidays like Tet. He provides housing and food for thousands of them. I just thought you might like to know the individual who's underwriting much of this morning and this particular lecture. Joe, you've already been introduced, so you can have the podium.
Well, I want to thank you, Tom, and Mike, and Tuan for this honor, and to say that I wish I could live up to it, but as Tom says, you can't necessarily live up to it, at least you can try. So I will try, but I should say that the task that Tuan assigned to me, which is outlined here, to talk about reconciliation with North Korea, means I can't possibly succeed. I mean, this is the hardest problem I think that we're facing. Indeed, I should declare my failure early on. Ezra Vogel and I were at the National Intelligence Council in the early days of the Clinton administration, dealing with this problem. That's nearly 30 years ago, and we didn't get it right then, and we still haven't. So this is a preface to say that while I've made some efforts to wrestle with the problem, when I come up with my solution at the end, you're going to say, "Is that all?" And I'll admit that in advance. But at least it is a different, or I will outline something different from what's on the table in the administration, or that's current in much of the public discourse. So if we look at reconciliation and North Korea, it's clear that reconciliation can have a couple of different meanings. If you go to the dictionary, one meaning is the restoration of friendly relations. In that sense, reconciliation is essential to human society. I mean, if we couldn't reconcile, we as a species which rests on working together would be unable to achieve what we have. But there's a more minimal second meaning of reconciliation, which we apply in international relations. And that's not friendly relations. It means reduction of enmity. Notice that that's a slightly lower threshold. So I'm going to say something about reconciliation, mostly in that second sense. Now, obviously, reconciliation between the United States and North Korea would be highly desirable, but it is extraordinarily difficult. And if you look at the rhetoric, which is typified the relationship, it's when you have presidents of countries threatening on the one hand to turn us into a sea of fire, and the president on the other hand saying he will turn North Korea with fire and fury, not exactly reconciling style and rhetoric. So the question is, are we on the brink of nuclear war as we listen to this extraordinary rhetoric? I have said consistently throughout this crisis, I think there's a very low probability of nuclear war. And I think that we must be careful not to mistake rhetoric with reality. Neither side is suicidal. And while people talk about the irrationality of North Korea, in fact, I think we could make a pretty good case that North Korea has been extremely rational. We may not like their objectives or the way they express or implement their objectives, but rationality, meaning do you choose a set of means that are get you to those ends. The North Koreans have been quite rational, and there's not much evidence that they are suicidal. So in that sense, I think the prospects of nuclear deterrence continuing to work, and that we will avoid nuclear war, I think there is a low probability of nuclear war. However, once one says that, one has to then ask, yes, but is there a prospect of conventional war? And the answer to that is higher than the probability of nuclear war. The answer to that is yes, there is a significant risk. And what's more, once you start with a conventional war, you have to realize that human behavior should always include the prospects of miscalculation. So while there might be no inclination toward nuclear war, the temptations of escalation are always there, and miscalculation can be crucial. I've often said that if you had asked whether the Tsar or the Kaiser or Emperor of Austria-Hungary had intended a war in 1914 in which they would lose their thrones and would also see their empires dismembered. Clearly not. They expected in August 1914 something that might be called the Third Balkan War, or the next Balkan War. It would go on for a few weeks, so the Austrians would give the Serbs a bloody nose, because the Serbs had been disrupting the Austrian Empire, and then we'd go back and play the game again. They never expected 4 years of battle, which would have the results that I mentioned. Similarly, when you look at Japan's attack in 1941 at Pearl Harbor, Japan did not, in one sense, act irrationally. They felt if they did nothing, they were going to be strangled by the American oil embargo. And even though there were some, particularly Admiral Yamamoto, who said our prospects of defeating the United States in a long war are very slim, but it might be better to take the risk and hope that it'll be a short war, that the Americans will back out, than to go ahead with what looks to us like sheer strangulation. I've sometimes likened this to being on the 12th floor of a burning building, and you have no way out, and somebody says, well, you have to jump. You say, jump. The chances of surviving a jump from this altitude is very, very slim, 1 in a million. But if you stay put, the chances of dying are absolutely certain. That it's rational to jump. To some extent, that's what Japan did in 1941. They didn't think they were going to beat the United States if it turned out to be a long war, but they said it's better than what we think is going to be certain strangulation because of the American oil embargo. The point I'm making is that when we look at what's the danger of nuclear war in North Korea, I think it's very unlikely, other things being equal, but if you reach a situation where the Americans, for example, try what they call a decapitating strike or a preemptive strike, we'll just go in with a small force and seize the weapons, or we'll just try a strike which will kill Kim Jong-un, or we will have a limited use of force. The key question is, will that lead to miscalculation? In other words, how much do we understand about the next steps? And that's why, while there's a lot of talk about don't take any options off the table, including the use of force, and that may have some significance when it comes to bargaining. On the other hand, if you ask how realistic is it, is there really a military solution to the problem of North Korea? I think the answer to that is no. And if we try it, I I worry that my low probability of nuclear war, which I assess now, could, through miscalculation, be undone. Now, if you look at the hostility between the United States and North Korea, it has very long origins. It goes all the way back to Kim Il-sung's decision to cross the 38th parallel in June of 1950. And it's interesting because in January of that year, Secretary of State Dean Acheson had said that Korea was outside our defense perimeter. So it's quite plausible that Kim could have thought, well, I can get away with this, or that Stalin had given him sort of the green light, thought I can get away with this, because the Americans have said this is outside the defense perimeter. What they didn't come up to understand was when Harry Truman learned about this, he said, you know, this reminds me of the 1930s and the failure to stand up to Hitler's aggression and the huge mistake that was made. And so Truman basically used the UN and organized a force to resist the North Korean invasion. And our former colleague Ernest May, who did a careful study of Truman's decision, said for Truman it was axiomatic. He didn't sit down and do a careful cost-benefit analysis, saying should I or shouldn't I go in here, what's the balance of power effects and so forth. It was that Truman had grown up feeling that the failure to stand up to Hitler in the 30s had been a huge mistake. And so when he was told that the North Koreans had crossed the 38th parallel, he said, we will resist.